Ew, I'm Hobo, and this is not a Let's Play Survival Series episode. This is a lore episode. And it is the first official lore episode. And there will be many more to come. And for the first episode of our lore series, I will be focusing on the villagers. Specifically, well, it's going to be most of the villagers, but I will be leaving out some of the a few of the more detailed parts of the history, because it goes deep. Not as deep as the ancient builders, but it definitely goes deep. And it's over the course of several centuries. So I'm going to start at the beginning for the villagers. Not the beginning for this world, but for the villagers. Because the villagers are not first... I know there's an argument for sentience, but essentially they're the first, they're not the first real intelligent species. They were made by the ancient builder race. I know a lot of people that don't like Matt Pat's theories. This is what I'm using for my world, and it's not entirely following his stuff. It is heavily influenced by it, as well as other sources. But anyway, they were first made by the ancient builder race as a way to try to extend their life. They began experimenting on themselves and made villagers. Now, the first villagers they came to were not very intelligent or smart, or they're not quite the same as the ancient builder race. They were more of an early experiment that didn't quite turn out as they had hoped, and they never really got to experiment too much with them, because I would say a few years, close to a decade after creating the villagers, the Piglins invaded, and that caused many other things, but that's another video. Anyway, the Piglins invasion the Piglins invaded the Audrey people, which are the first people to create villagers. They were a desert race, and the Piglins captured the villagers and used them as slaves. Now, I'm going to jump forward in time here, but eventually the Piglins get eradicated, and the desert villagers stay behind in the desert and worship the Piglins as their former masters as gods. But not all of the villagers felt so inclined to stay and worship their masters or whatever. So they left. They split into two groups outside of the desert villagers, the tundra and the jungle villagers. So the tundra villagers, they went to the extreme to escape from the Piglins. They want nothing to do with the Piglins ever again, so they went to the most extreme, a very, very cold environment that they believed the Piglins would not travel to, because they preferred a very extreme and hot climate. And the jungle villagers, on the other hand, went into hiding. They preferred the thick jungle forests, because the dense jungle concealed them much better than other biomes they could find. But the jungle villagers, they grew fast. There's abundant food sources, abundant wood. They grew fast, and they populated very quickly and began to expand very quickly. As a result, they had many settlements, I would say, that began to split off from each other. They're all still jungle villagers at this time, but They had far more communities than either the desert villagers or the tundra. And some of the jungle villagers grew very greedy with their resources and began to raid other jungle villages and even some of the desert villages because they wanted to consolidate their resources so much. But a majority of the jungle villagers, only a small portion of the jungle villagers were doing their raiding. A majority of the jungle villagers remained pacifists. They didn't want to be like their former masters, who were very aggressive and, well, doing much as the pillagers are doing. They're raiding. They wanted to remain passive, and they did. Eventually, the raiding villagers would become what we know as the pillagers. They would spend more and more time indoors rather than the outdoors farming, and only leave their settlements or fortresses to gather and raid resources. Then they would return and then spend the rest of their time indoors. Now, the jungle villagers, they received the most amount of raids from the pillagers, and it led to the deforestation and eventual loss of their home. Not all of the jungle villagers were very happy with this, so they split and became those that split became the swamp villagers. And these swamp villagers, well, they definitely did not agree with the pillagers raiding them all the time, nor did they agree with the pacifism of the jungle villagers. So they took a more aggressive stance and began setting up strongholds and fortresses throughout their land, and eventually they would even take on pillagers more aggressively. But that's another video. So now to the plains villagers. The swamp villagers, they were expanding, or not necessarily expanding, but they were taking on the pillagers very aggressively. And some of the swamp villagers, they just wanted a peaceful, normal life. So those that split off from the swamp villagers became the plains villagers. But they didn't immediately go to the plains. They went to, I guess it would be considered the birch and oak forest. They settled there, and through many years of cutting down the forest, they caused deforestation and the construction of their biome, the plains biome. Now these plains villagers, they're a mix between their pacifist jungle origin and their more aggressive swamp villager origin. They don't want to be a warring nation, but they also aren't afraid to defend and actively protect their land, which is why they split from the swamp villagers. And that's how Lumbria was officially formed. Well, one of the plains villages was formed. They started out, all of the plains villages started out as forest people, and they cut down their forests, and that was like their main, I wouldn't necessarily source of income, but that was mainly what they did. Cut down forests for homes and clearing land to build their settlement. And that's how my plains villagers came to be. That's all for this episode of Lore. And hope you guys like it. If you did, leave a like. If you want to see some more, subscribe. And if you got any comments or suggestions about my lore, there's a lot more lore to go over, but that's just a small snippet, and I feel like that tied into the current builds I'm doing, so I wanted to include it. But yeah, if you have any comments or suggestions or things you want to see or questions about my lore, or things you think I can do to improve it, let me know. Peace.